Hey guys, this is Clay Cheshire with Munitions Law Group again. We're doing, again, a series of videos that are really geared toward licensees, or in this case today, potential licensees, since that's what I spend most of my time doing. And what we're going to talk about today is going to be FFL applications now in this under the current ATF, under the current administration, and just some observations we've had in the last couple of years with clients that we've helped. Obviously, if you want to deal in firearms or manufacture firearms or import firearms or manufacture ammunition, you have to obtain a federal firearms license, and that's issued by the federal government. ATF is the administrator and regulator and enforcer of the law under which federal firearms licenses are issued. And the law, it's what we call kind of a shell issue type scheme, right? It basically says that a qualified applicant, the law basically says that a qualified applicant for a federal firearms license, that ATF will issue one to a qualified applicant. And so ATF's limited in its ability to deny applications. The two basic grounds for denial are that the owners and or responsible persons are not, for whatever reason, not qualified under the law to own or operate a federal firearms licensee. And when I say not qualified, I mean they are essentially prohibited persons. There's some background check issue that means that they're not able to own or possess firearms. And if that happens, ATF is generally not going to issue the FFL if you have an owner or responsible person that is disqualified on a new application. The other ground is if the premises are not appropriate. And when I say premises, I mean the physical location, because a license attaches to a physical location. So, for example, if I have ABC LLC and I own 6 different retail locations, and then I have to get 6 different retail FFLs, one for each of those 6 locations, because the license is issued specific to the premises, which ATF calls the licensed premises. So one of the grounds for denying an FFL is if the premises is not appropriate. And this is really sort of a broader ground for denial than disqualification. I mean, disqualification really only occurs in limited circumstances. With premises, you have a number of issues, right? So you have potential zoning. If the zoning classification for the premises where you want to obtain the license does not allow that type of activity at that location, at that property, then ATF has a basis to deny the FFL. If you don't have a possessory interest in the property, a lot of times we just call that a lease, but the applicant for the license has to show a legal possessory interest in that property, whether by owning it or leasing it. So there has to be some clear written lease or other arrangement that satisfies ATF. And with the lease, ATF generally will require that there's some language, whether in the permitted uses section of the lease or in a separate letter, we call it the landlord acknowledgement, where the owner of the property acknowledges that that certain ATF-regulated operations will be occurring at that premises and consents to it. I will say that we have, in the last 2 or 3 years, we have seen, at least in some field divisions, we've seen some of the what we call qualification inspections. We've seen some of the ATF IOIs who conduct these inspections asking for more information than they have historically. For example, we've had in a couple of field divisions, IOIs will actually request that the zoning regulator confirm in writing that zoning allows that activity. That can be a little bit of a challenge because you are having to get, especially like in a larger city, you're having to get the zoning regulator to actually, take the time to pay attention to what you're doing and respond to you and give you what you ask. And that can be a little harder than perhaps in a rural area. So we're seeing some of that. We are seeing some of the IOIs being a little bit more detail-oriented about some of the lease language, particularly focusing on if it's a lease, the landlord's ability to access the property, under what circumstances they can, and also making sure that the appropriate consent language is in there. When you sign an FFL application, a lot of people may not know this, but when you sign an FFL application, you're certifying that the business that you want to conduct is not prohibited by state or local law, and that specifically includes zoning. And there's even some language in the application form itself that says that you, the applicant, are going to have evaluated the suitability of this premises under zoning law before submitting the application. So it's not one of those things where you submit the application and then later on, while it's pending over the next 6 to 8 weeks, you go and figure out the zoning thing. You figure it out in advance. A couple other things that we're seeing, when you submit an application for an FFL, you also ask that ATF approve certain responsible persons. The responsible persons are, you have to have at least one. We always recommend that you have at least two, because the RP is the person that can communicate with ATF on behalf of the licensee. And the reason we always recommend at least two is things happen. And if something happens to a single RP, it can certainly cause some challenges for that business. So, but sometimes we've seen in some situations, I would say historically we've been able to, for the most part, identify. I think the default position ATF has taken is if you're an owner, officer, or director of a company that seeks an FFL, that you're an RP. The reality is that a lot of businesses are diversified. They don't just do firearms, and they may have a number of officers and directors, and only one of the officers or directors may have anything to do with the firearms part of the business. Or you may have officers and directors that are pure financial partners and don't have any control over the day-to-day operations of the business. Historically, we've had clients successfully adopt resolutions, for example, that specifically designates the people that should be RPs as RPs, and stating that no one else, including any other officer or director or owner, is going to function as an RP. And that's been acceptable to ATF. We've seen, though, in the last couple of years, there have been a couple of circumstances where ATF has said, no, you have to make these other people RPs. And, that's their position in that particular field division. Whether they're right legally or not, we haven't argued those situations, because in both of those situations, the client has been very pragmatic in saying it's fine, we'll include them. We don't want to have any hiccups or argue about that particular issue with ATF, so we're going to go ahead and proceed as they request. But just a heads up that ATF's default rule generally is, and I may have missed this earlier, if you're an owner, officer, or director of an entity, the starting point for them is you're an RP and have to be an RP on the application. Just a heads up. So here are our recommendations. The FFL application process itself by law is supposed to take place in 60 days or less. What we usually tell people is to anticipate that it will take 60 to 75 days to, you'll submit your application, it will go to Oregon along with your payment. The payment will be taken in Oregon, and then the application package will be sent across the country to Martinsburg to the licensing center, where it will be the data in your application will be entered into a database by a processor, and then the background check information will be sent to the FBI to do a background check on your RPs. And then once the background check results are back, and assuming everything's fine, then the application package will go out to the field, in the field division, and ultimately the field office that would conduct the qualification inspection. That person will get the package, review it, and will contact you. And sometimes they contact you and ask for more information. Sometimes they contact you and say, hey, I want to come see you tomorrow to do your qualification inspection. It just kind of depends. And then they'll come and do the qualification inspection, and assuming they don't need any additional information, they'll send a report up to the licensing center. Let's just assume to issue the license, and then in about 10 days you'll have a paper FFL. So, again, we say assume 60 to 75 days for the application, qualification inspection, and another 15 days or so to get the license. So it's about a 90-day process. That's what we tell people. It can be delayed, right, by issues like I talked about before with zoning. And so we have recommendations that we make to people, and it's how we conduct ourselves anytime we handle applications to try to avoid delay and keep things as smooth as possible. One of the things we advise is that people make an advanced zoning evaluation that makes sure that that property that they want as their licensed premises, that their activities are the activities that they can conduct under the license they seek are, keep in mind, like if you're going to apply for a manufacturing FFL, but your intent is primarily to deal in firearms, and you may occasionally make a custom rifle, your licensed premises has to be appropriate for the manufacturing, because that's the license you seek. So, keep that in mind when you're doing a zoning evaluation. The property needs to be zoned such that you can conduct the activity under the license you seek from ATF. The other thing, so zoning, we also advise people to make sure that their leases have good permitted use and landlord consent language that specifically says that, I'm the landlord, understand that this tenant is going to be engaged in, certain ATF regulated activities, and spell them out. Be specific. The other thing, if you are sharing a licensed premises with other tenants, keep in mind that, ATF is going to want to see that you as the licensee have exclusive possession over whatever portion of the property you occupy. And so you're going to need to segregate your premises from any other tenant's premises in the building. And you're going to need to make sure that you have the ability to restrict access to just your employees. So that's another thing you're going to have to put some thought into if you're sharing a building with other tenants. Also, having a separate area to receive deliveries. If you're receiving firearm shipments, and there's a general sort of what I'll call mail room, and there's 3 different tenants in this building, you don't want those other 2 tenants receiving your firearms. So you need to come up with a way to receive those shipments directly and not potentially through a general mailroom. I talked a little bit about this before. The reason you plan is to avoid delay and hiccups. If problems do arise, ATF can hold your application for a limited amount of time, or they can offer to let you withdraw it and resubmit it later, or they can deny it. I would say historically, when we've had clients that have had issues pop up, ATF has generally held these applications while they actively work to resolve the issues. And I don't know that we've ever had ATF cap that amount of time, but I know that generally the issues were resolved in a matter of weeks, not months. We're starting to see potentially some indication that the IOIs are not wanting to hold, or the field divisions are not wanting to hold these applications open pending resolution of issues. That instead there seems to be some trend toward requiring that the applications be withdrawn and later resubmitted, which of course causes problems. Not only does it, it forces you to sort of go back through that lengthy process of submitting the application, but it's going to take more time, be potentially more expensive, and it just is disruptive. So you really want to avoid even getting into this situation, which is why you do all this planning in advance. And that's what we say, just planning and preparation. It'll minimize the risk of delay. It'll make the process smoother. And just a heads up, that this is one way legally where depending on how things are enforced, it can create headaches for people that want to get into the industry. So just keep that in mind if you're thinking about applying for an FFL or even potentially moving your FFL to a different location. Some of this stuff's relevant to that, and just understand that we're dealing with some evolution with ATF, potential evolution with ATF, and that additional planning on the front end will help. So everyone have a great day, and we'll talk again soon.